So with the Amazing Spider-Man 2 coming out, I figured it'd be a good idea to have a discussion on the main antagonist of this film. And I figured it would be a good idea to really kind of highlight how he is a dangerous foe to Spider-Man, but how he's also one of Spider-Man's weaker foes due to the weaknesses that he has. And so in this video, we're going to be discussing the character Electro.
I just wanna get loose when the beat drops.
So, before we get too far into this discussion, there are a couple very basic principles in electricity that we need to discuss. The first is the function of an electrical capacitor, and the second is the concept of resistance. So, an electrical capacitor is something that takes in an electrical charge, reduces the electrical charge, and then outputs that reduction of electrical charge. So, let's take your computer as an example. I think that's a really good way to go. Let's say that you have assembled a computer, and you have a 1000 watt power supply, and your video card only requires 400 watts of power in order for it to function. Now the question you might be asking yourself is, what keeps your power supply from discharging 1000 watts of power into your video card and blowing it up? Well, that's what the electrical capacitors do on your video card. If you look on your video card, or any kind of computer hardware, you'll see these little copper heads, so to speak. And what these do is they take in that 1000 watts of power, and they reduce that 1000 watts of power down, and they discharge it out in the form of 400 watts of power. And that is, in effect, how an electrical capacitor works. Now, for the most part, all electrical capacitors work the same way, whether you're talking about a capacitor in a computer or something in the Hoover Dam. It all pretty much functions the exact same way. Now, resistance is exactly what it sounds like. Resistance is the idea of electricity running into resistance or coming into contact with resistance as it passes from one object to another. Now, with regards to this example, the best one I can use, or I guess the best kind of analogy I can use, is the one that my supervisor used for me when I first started my job. Let's say, for example, that you have a great big huge tank full of water, and you have two connections on this tank. One connection is for a 1-inch hose that's 1 inch in diameter. The next connection is for a 1-inch hose that is 1 foot in diameter. Now, if you were to connect the 1-inch hose, you would get far less water coming through that hose than if you connected the 1 foot hose. This is resistance, the amount of current you can pass through an object. When it comes to electricity, electricity follows the path of least resistance, and something like copper has a much lower resistance than something like rubber. So let's say, for example, that you had a material that was composed of both rubber and copper. If you were to analyze this in some form of machinery that would allow you to observe the transfer of electrons as electricity went through the material, what you would see is you would see the electricity going through the copper instead of going through the rubber, because rubber has a much higher resistance. Rubber is equivalent to a 1-inch in diameter hose. Copper is equivalent to a 1 foot in diameter hose. So, with that being said, let's get into the video. So Electro is one of these guys that a lot of people consider to be one of Spider-Man's most dangerous foes, but I don't look at him that way. I really kind of look at him as one of Spider-Man's weaker foes, because despite the fact that he is capable of taking in virtually an unlimited amount of electricity and then discharging up to 1,000,000 volts, he is still restricted by the principles and the inherent weaknesses of electricity. And in fact, during the first battle that Electro and Spider-Man had, Spider-Man wore rubber gloves and sprayed him with a water hose. And that's how he beat him. Not much of a fight there. It's really kind of anticlimactic when you think about the character and how he played out. But Electro is really kind of, he's kind of like Juggernaut in this sense. Of course, he's very intelligent, but he's really kind of someone that utilizes his incredible abilities for mundane goals. Electro was previously a guy named Maxwell Dillon, and he was an electrical lineman. That is to say, he's the guy that you see on top of electrical lines who's hooking up cables and wires and running cable and different stuff like that. There came a point in which which one of his co-workers was stranded on a line, and Maxwell Dillon agreed to help him, but only under the condition that his co-worker would pay him for it. So his co-worker agreed to pay him, and Maxwell Dillon began to climb the pole in order to get his co-worker out of a bind so that his co-worker could get off the line safely. During this time, there was kind of a freak storm that was taking place, and Maxwell Dillon was struck by lightning. When he was struck by lightning, he gained the ability to manipulate vast amounts of electricity, but once he gained this power, he basically used it to start robbing banks and to really kind of gain great wealth. And that's how he came into contact with Spider-Man, because he was in effect a bank robber. And to me, this is really kind of indicative of what you see with a lot of villains in the realm of Marvel Comics, especially when you're talking about villains who are comparable to weaker superheroes. When it comes to someone like Spider-Man, of course, Spider-Man is not an astronomically strong character. And so you have to have someone who is proportionally strong to Spider-Man. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Electro was written the way that he was. The ability to discharge 1 million volts of electricity is more than enough to kill a human being. But despite this ability, despite the fact that he can discharge this much electricity at one time, the fact that Spider-Man can defeat him by spraying him with a water hose and wearing rubber gloves is really kind of indicative of this character kind of having a balance. I think he really is one of the more balanced characters. Now, when it comes to Electro and his engagements with Spider-Man, there were a couple times, of course, the first time he defeated him, he lost at the hands of Spider-Man. The second time he lost at the hands of Spider-Man. And from here, he really kind of began to involve himself in the task of using numbers to defeat Spider-Man. That is to say, teaming up with other villains, the Sinister Six being one of the more notable examples. And Maxwell Dillon, of course, by his very nature, is kind of a loner. He doesn't really want to team up with people. But when he's kind of faced with the circumstance where he was constantly defeated at the hands of Spider-Man, he really didn't have much of a choice. Usually when he engages Spider-Man, it's really kind of a cat and mouse game. And he ends up engaging Spider-Man in an area that's most conducive to his abilities. So think places like electrical power plants, places where he can recharge his power with very little effort. Because with Electro, his power is passive, meaning that he does not have to actively engage in charging himself up. As long as he comes into contact with something that can discharge electricity, his body will automatically charge itself up for him. And it's really kind of interesting the way that his power works. Of course, he can transfer himself through virtually anything that conducts electricity. And of course, he can travel along power lines and things like that by using electricity to kind of propel himself. But with the normal human body, that is to say you or myself, of course we have something called adrenaline. And adrenaline is kind of a secretion by the I'm not exactly sure which organ it is that secretes adrenaline, but suffice it to say, whenever you're in a state of high duress, let's say, for example, you're walking down the road, and as you're walking down the road, you see a car coming flying at you. You'll get a metallic taste in your mouth, you'll get a heightened sense of things might slow down. That's adrenaline rushing through your body. You kind of have this heightened understanding of everything that's going on, and your body is kind of in fight or flight mode. With Electro, instead of adrenaline, he has electricity. So the more excited that he gets, the more ramped up that he gets, the more powerful he gets in terms of his ability to manipulate electricity. But again, because of the very fact that he does exist according to the laws of electricity, he has a lot of weaknesses. So, with that being said, I really am kind of interested to see how Jamie Foxx plays the role in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, because Electro is kind of a mainstay. I mean, he was like the sixth villain that appeared. I think he actually appeared in issue number 6 of Spider-Man. He was one of the first few villains that Spider-Man faced, and so I'm really kind of interested to see how it's portrayed, because he's really kind of a mainstay, and he holds a special place in a lot of the hearts and minds of Spider-Man fans. So, I'm going to go ahead and bring this commentary to an end. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.